I can't believe I'm here. I'm only half listening as the court-appointed marriage counselor rambles on about rules, expectations, and other nonsense. I look around her rather drab office with the obligatory dark oak drawers littered with books I'm sure she's never read. Heck, she probably can't even pronounce half the titles. The room is decorated in therapeutic style with the usual diplomas and other related nonsense. And yes, there's an ultrasonic diffuser for essential oils in the corner. At least her soothing water therapy rock stood in the waiting area. My dentist has one of those, too. I'm not sure if the noise it makes is meant to mask the sound of the drill or the screams of patients. I asked once and was told it was to quiet the patients in the waiting area. My thoughts went something like this. Maybe if you didn't make me wait 45 minutes after my scheduled appointment time before condescending to acknowledge my presence, I wouldn't need to be soothed. We sat across from an ornate dark walnut table in two reclining chairs that, aside from being uncomfortable, had to be at least 30 years old. Her office had once been stylish, I'm sure, but now it looked like she'd furnished it at a Salvation Army store. Oops, she just asked me a question. I looked up and met her gaze. Mr. Johnson, this is very important. Are you paying attention at all? No, not really. Repeat the question, please. A clearly annoyed Dr. Meredith Wickenburg, clearly not used to honest answers, took a deep breath and looked at me in a way that made me remember my fifth-grade teacher when I wasn't paying attention to her. By the way, how come a doctor who expects to be taken seriously wants you to call her Mir, with the accent on the second E? Really, if you want to be called Marie, just spell your damn name right. You are aware, Mr. Johnson, that the court requires not only your presence here, but your cooperation and participation. I remind you that if I report to the judge that you are not following expected protocols, he may hold you in contempt. What the hell are protocols, I say to myself. I understand, Dr. Wickenburg. I have no intention of ever calling her Mir. And another thing, why the hell do I live in one of the few states where counseling can be required? I'll have to be careful to make sure I only say things like that in my head, because while I have nothing but contempt for what's happening to me, I don't want to go to jail sitting next to a group of guys who are there because they robbed a liquor store or stole $1 million and have to say I went there for refusing to cooperate with Mir. I understand, Dr. Wickenburg, so you'd better repeat the question so the judge doesn't get mad at both of us. Mr. Johnson, I would prefer you address me as Frank. But your name is Thomas? I know, but I've always liked the name Frank. Mr. Johnson. I interrupted her with a dismissive wave of my hand. Okay, I'm being a jerk and I'm sorry, but I'm sure you realize that I don't want to be here. However, I promise to behave from now on. Please, I beg you, just repeat your question. Okay. Then is it okay if I call you Tom? Actually, I prefer Mr. Johnson. You and I are not going to be friends. I don't mind, but I would consider it a favor if you would call me Mr. Johnson. Okay, Mr. Johnson. My question was simple, though I now ask it with great trepidation. What are your expectations of these sessions? I laughed briefly, and I thought I saw a glint in the doctor's eyes when she said that. Maybe I would like her after all. Honestly, and I say this sincerely, my expectations are that I will be divorced at the end of these sessions. This raised the noise level considerably from the constant wailing of my wife sitting to my left. Dr. Wickenburg started to say something, but demurred. Perhaps she was a quick learner. She turned to my wife Ruby and asked her the same question. My hopefully soon-to-be ex-wife, who hadn't stopped crying the entire time we were sitting there, launched into a rather long soliloquy about how she had made a mistake, wanted a chance to show me how much she loved me. Blah, blah, blah. My thoughts returned to the incredibly stupid reason I am forced to sit in this chair. My wife of 13 years, the college-educated mother of our 3 elementary school-aged children, has decided that she needs to experience sex with another man. Namely, with Chandler Bisbee, a supporting actor on a late-night soap opera she was addicted to. I mean, he wasn't even the star of that stupid show. We went out to dinner for no particular reason. I just realized that being a stay-at-home mom and baby judge all the time was boring her. so I found a babysitter for the night, specifically her parents for the kids and a hotel room for us, so we could have a drink and not worry about driving. I wanted to treat her to a nice quiet adult dinner, some conversation, and maybe even a little dancing. I had never been a good dancer and didn't really enjoy it, but Ruby was a great dancer and loved it. I even took dance lessons to at least avoid embarrassing her on the parquet, and got to the point where I could hold my own. And we were having a great time until that asshole Bisbee showed up. Dinner was over, and we moved from the 4.5-star hotel restaurant to the club room. On the dance floor, we waltzed to a slow number with my wife's head resting on my shoulder. Not only was she thanking me for a wonderful evening, but she was whispering all sorts of obscenities that she was going to do to me later in our room when I felt my shoulder being touched. Turning around, I saw a handsome man about my age looking directly into my wife's eyes. "Do you mind if I step in?" It wasn't a question, and he didn't even look in my direction. He just started dancing with my wife. I was in shock as they slipped away from me. I stood there and felt everyone's eyes on me. All I could think about at that moment was going back to the table and sipping my Jim Beam Black with ice. I really didn't want to make a scene. After about 45 minutes and a few songs, my wife returned to our table alone, brought the daiquiri straw to her lips, and took a long sip. She acted as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. "So it was Chandler Bisbee," she said simply. "Who the hell is Chandler Bisbee?" I asked, barely holding back. "He's a famous actor, and he's on my favorite TV show." "If he was famous, I'd know his name, and you have like 9 favorite shows." I tried my best to keep my cool. Even though I was seething inside, I didn't want to disturb the calm, and besides, I felt like there was still a small chance that Ruby would still teach me the new position she called wheelbarrow later that night in our hotel room. She quickly pushed the thought away from me. "Wow, I'm really thirsty." With her free hand, she cupped her face. "Chandler is such a good dancer," she stated wistfully. Standing up and holding out my hand to her, I said, "That's wonderful, dear, but can we finish the dance since it was so rudely interrupted?" She didn't budge from her chair. "Look, honey, I already promised Chandler that I'd save the rest of the evening's dancing for him." "What did you do?" I shouted. "Sit down, Thomas, you're making a scene." She looked around restlessly in all directions. "The whole club mustn't know our business." I couldn't help it. But dumbfounded, I sat down and started looking around too. And then my gaze fell on a smarmy bastard sitting alone on the floor. He was smirking, looking at me. If I'd had more time and wasn't in a state of shock, I'm sure I could have come up with something more eloquent. But all that came out was a, "Huh?" "Look, Tommy, I love you and I know you love me. I'll be yours forever, but I'm going to be with Chandler this weekend. When I get home Sunday night, I'll be your faithful and loving wife again. It's just something I have to do for myself. I promise you this will only be a one-time thing. If I had more time, I would try to explain things better, but Chandler can't wait to leave." Finishing her statement, she leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, and got up to leave. My brain finally turned on, and I reached out and squeezed her forearm very firmly. "Listen to me carefully, Ruby. I'm only going to say this once. Now, there is still some hope for our marriage, but if you go to him, I will file for divorce on Monday morning." "Oh, Tommy, don't be so melodramatic." She gave me the dismissive flick of her wrist that women do when they're sick of talking about something. "You're not going to ruin our family over this. Are you seriously going to be a part-time dad, living in a one-bedroom apartment and trying to survive on 30% of what you make now because of something as insignificant as this? Act like an adult, and we'll talk when I get home Sunday night." She was very dismissive of me. And then she left. By the time Ruby got home very late Sunday night, the kids had been at her stunned parents' house since Saturday, and I was long gone. By long gone, I mean 150 miles from home, unpacked and tented in my brother's basement. By mid-Monday morning, I met with a family law attorney, had him draft my divorce petition, and completed the errands he gave me. The attorney warned me that my wife's assessment of what my life would become after the divorce was not far from the truth. However, he confidently stated that her estimate of the percentage of my income that I would keep was wrong. He felt that 35% was a more accurate estimate. I didn't care. I didn't want to spend another day with her after she disrespected me. I had heard that true love dies slowly, but in my case, it went out like a candle in a sudden wind when she turned her back on me. I felt nothing but deep anger at her and unfathomable sadness at having to leave my children behind. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could keep me close to her. I hope someday, when they are older, I can explain this to my children so they can at least understand my reasoning, even if they can't forgive me. She tried, but couldn't reach me because I had left my computer, phone, our official wedding picture torn in half, and my ring on the kitchen table. She tried to contact me at work, but was told I was taking an emergency week-long vacation. The receptionist also told her that she was no longer allowed on company property. Her phone calls would not be taken, and that if she continued to disrupt the company, they would have to get a restraining order. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but I later learned from her parents that when she got home and saw the little shrine I had left for her, she burst into tears. By the time she got to her parents, she had fully realized what she had done to her marriage. She and the kids didn't leave the house for a week. For a while, they thought she would have to be institutionalized. She didn't eat or drink and hardly slept at all. The children were absolutely terrified. Her mother told me that in the end, she literally slapped her daughter in the face and told her that she had ruined everything, that she needed to get her act together and take care of her children. I really wish I could have been there for that. The next day, a bailiff showed up at their house, and she was officially notified that the marriage was dissolved. Her parents were shocked when I explained to them what had happened, and although I did not expect them to react that way, they were supportive of my actions and helped me keep in touch with my children. Only once did they ask me if I could forgive their dead daughter. Those were their words, not mine. After I told them no, from that day forward, they never discussed anything with me other than the welfare and occupation of their grandchildren. I am forever grateful to them for that. There were many conversations between our attorneys, but despite numerous attempts to get me to sit down, I did not say a word to Ruby from that evening until we arrived for our first mandatory counseling session. We had a couple more meetings scheduled together through our attorneys, but since mine said I didn't have to be there, I chose not to. On both occasions, Ruby threw a tantrum. I guess she got it into her head that all she had to do was talk to me and everything would be fine. I suppose it was a rational thought on her part, because all it took was one conversation with me to end our marriage. During our court hearing, I didn't even look at her. When she tried to speak to me, I ignored her. That may not have been the smartest move on my part, because after a while she was ecstatic, and I was sent to joint counseling by a slightly annoyed judge. At that point, to say I had anger management issues is a massive understatement. I considered ignoring the order, but my lawyer said that wasn't a very sensible plan. I thought about quitting my job and just disappearing, but my attorney told me that wouldn't lessen my financial responsibility and asked, could I really do that to my children? Of course I couldn't. So here I sit at the first of 12 scheduled weekly meetings. It hasn't been a great start, and judging from my first interaction with Dr. Wickenberg, things aren't going to improve anytime soon. My trip down memory lane was interrupted by another question from her. Apparently my wife had finished her monologue, and now it was my turn again. I asked, Mr. Johnson, is there anything you would like to say to your wife? She told me that you haven't spoken since that incident. You mean that incident where she left me alone in the middle of the dance floor to spend the weekend having fun with her new boyfriend? That incident? Really, Mr. Johnson, that kind of language doesn't help. Well, that incident didn't help me much, Doctor. I know, I'm very sorry about it. No, Doctor, I don't want to say anything to my wife. I folded my arms and leaned back in my chair, trying to be inconspicuous. For a few moments, neither one said anything. I think they were both shocked, and for nothing. I hadn't said anything to her in over 3 months, so why wouldn't I start now? Dr. Wickenberg, however, was curt. Okay then, Mr. Johnson, why don't you tell me how you felt when Ruby left you on the dance floor? It looked like playtime was over. I'm not sure I can adequately explain how I felt without breaking the doctor, and I don't want to give Ruby the satisfaction of seeing how much she hurt me. What makes you think she'll get satisfaction from knowing she hurt you? The doctor asked. Somehow she was surprised that I thought that. My wife intervened. Can't you at least look at me, Tommy? I ignored her and continued to stare at the doctor. Try to explain, please. Dr. Wickenburg leaned forward in her chair, folding her hands on the table. She looked genuinely interested in my answer. I've never been in so much pain in my life. And the only reason I can imagine her doing that to me is to cause me deep suffering that I can never forgive or forget. But do you know what was the worst of it? She said nothing and only shook her head. She told me that what she was about to do was insignificant. She said that breaking our bonds of loyalty was of no consequence to her. It seemed impossible, but Ruby's wails grew louder and louder. At this point, Dr. Wickenburg and I both looked at her. I turned my attention back to the doctor. Do we need to call 911? I asked with genuine concern. Ruby looked like she was hyperventilating or going into shock. I thought she might pass out. Dr. Wickenburg didn't seem to know what to do, so I felt I had to act. Ruby, honey, stop your incessant crying and I promise I'll talk to you, I shouted to her. Her eyes lit up and she began to try her best to control her emotions, but it wasn't easy. I reached out to the doctor for help and she signaled me to slow down with my hands, so we both just let Ruby calm down for a few minutes. After about 10 minutes, when she had calmed down enough, she turned around and, between bouts of sniffling, turned to me with a pleading look. Are you really going to talk to me? Yes, Ruby, I will, I promise, but you need to pull yourself together. Remember the other night when you told me I had to act like an adult and we'd talk about it when I got home? Well, yeah. Let's pretend it's Sunday night and you and I will talk about it, okay? Her whimpering had almost stopped by now, and she nodded her head and blew her nose. I thought, Dr. Wickenburg gets paid $175 an hour and she's sitting there like a lump. Shouldn't she be saying something doctorly right now? I guess not. When Ruby calmed down enough, we just stared at each other for a while before I could speak. Ruby, do you realize how much you've hurt and humiliated me, but what have you done? I think I do realize, and now I'm really sorry for what I did, but that wasn't my intention. It doesn't matter what you intended, it matters what you did to me, I said, completely serious. You destroyed me. I couldn't believe it when you said what you were going to do was so insignificant. Do you know what the most precious gift a husband can give his wife? She shook her head negatively. It's the gift of fidelity. I've never been a woman, so I can't speak for your gender, but I believe that men are not monogamous by nature. I was very proud to remain faithful to you. It wasn't that hard, even though I had opportunities to break that vow. I knew you expected a lot from me, but for me it went beyond that. It meant so much to me to be able to give you such a gift, to make such a commitment. It was unfathomable to me that you would give it all up for a weekend with a second-rate actor. It just killed me. I can't express the depth of my emotions. And to top it all off, you threatened me. A shocked Ruby exclaimed, I never did that. No, Ruby, you told me what would happen to me if I filed for divorce. I remember your exact words because they pierced me to the core. You said, Tommy, don't be so melodramatic. You're not going to destroy our family over this. Are you seriously going to be a part-time dad, living in a one-bedroom apartment and trying to survive on 30% of what you make now, over a little thing like this? Her eyes widened and she covered her mouth with her hand. Oh no, Tommy, you misinterpreted what I said. I didn't mean a threat. I was talking about what would happen to our family in the event of a divorce. That's exactly what I meant to say. It doesn't matter what you meant, Ruby. It's how I interpreted it. You can say whatever you want, but it won't change my mind. You have no right to tell me how I should feel about it. And the final straw for me, Ruby, is the loss of intimacy. You and I have talked about this many times. We both believe that before you die, the best moments of your life flash before your eyes. If you're a decent person, those visionary thoughts are what remain when you cross the threshold. Ruby began to sniffle again, approaching her previous level. She had a look of utter defeat, because she knew what was coming next. Can you look me in the eye and tell me that the weekend you spent with Bisbee isn't going to be one of those end-of-life memories? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. It was obvious to both of us. In fact, it will surpass all the intimate sexual encounters we've had together, won't it? I suggested rhetorically. How am I going to be able to compete with that for the next 30 years? A pause hung in the room. Strangely, Ruby stopped crying and looked at me long and hard. My voice was taut and very soft. "This is what you stole from me, Ruby." She took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. She finally understood. "We're never going to get back together, are we?" she asked, but we both realized it was more of a statement. "No, we're not. The way I see it, we have two options. We can keep playing this stupid counseling game, wasting time and money, or we can spend every spare minute we have figuring out how to make this work for our kids. We owe it to them to make this transition for them as smooth as possible, don't you think?" At this point, Dr. Wickenburg finally intervened and said that our time for this week was up, but she thought we had made significant progress. "Really?" Ruby just looked at her and shook her head. We both got up and left. We left as we had come in separate cars, but not before setting up a time to meet and sort things out so we could move on with our lives. The next day, Ruby talked to her lawyer and withdrew her request for counseling. A week later, the two of us worked out a joint custody agreement that we felt was best for our children and would keep us both out of the soup line at the local family shelter. It provided for all 5 of us to be together on major holidays. It may have been too late, but we both acted like adults. 6 months later, our divorce was final. Epilogue, 20 years later. Ruby and I were at our youngest daughter Winslow's wedding to a very nice young man named Robert. We laughed that we had finally married off our last child, so now we would both have lots of extra income and no longer have to shop at the dollar discount store. We congratulated ourselves for raising our children well. We were very proud of them all. We had to work hard. There were some tough times, but they seemed to have weathered our divorce well. At least it didn't discourage them from getting married, so that was a good sign. Interestingly, in the time since our divorce, neither of us have remarried or even had a serious long-term relationship. In many ways, we still behaved like a family. We saw each other regularly and continued to spend holidays together. But as the children grew older and needed their parents less and less, we began to see each other less often. Although we emailed and texted frequently, the wedding was the first face-to-face meeting in over 2 months. We both had a little too much to drink, maybe even too much, and somehow ended up in bed together in a hotel. We lay in each other's arms, sweaty and exhausted because we had finally tried out the wheelbarrow thing. Believe me, if you know what it is, it was no small feat for a couple in their 50s. We were both very grateful that we were still in decent shape and that we didn't have to call an ambulance. "You do know, Tommy, that you just crossed that guy from Bisbee off my top 10 list of death-related moments, don't you?" I only smiled and replied, "That doesn't mean we're getting married again." "I know, but I wouldn't want to risk ruining a beautiful friendship." We both fell into a deep and peaceful sleep.